Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us to the third of our guest speakers. And I'd like to just talk about the program for a moment until I introduce our guest. And we've had a terrific response, great speakers in Jim Molan to start with, Andrew Hasty, and our next event will be in March. But I have tonight great pleasure in introducing a good mate and somebody that I think has taken on probably one of the greatest challenges of the 21st century, and that is the whole rethinking of the energy sector, the restructuring. And if there's anything that's at the heart of Australia's future prosperity, it has to start with what this portfolio represents. And it's a particular pleasure because Minister Taylor has been a great friend of the democratic reform movement and showed enormous courage in holding the line in representing the best interests of our members in leading into Rose Hill and subsequent annual general meetings. So without any further ado, it's with great pleasure I introduce Minister Angus Taylor. Thank you, Angus.
Well, thanks, Walter, and really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak to this group and many friends there I can see. It's wonderful to have this opportunity and talk about what, of course, has been a very topical area, as you rightly say, Walter, in Australia for many years and will continue to be because it's important, and things that are important inevitably will have emotion around them. I guess the starting point in this debate is that there are a wide divergence of views in Australia on this issue of energy and emissions reduction. There's a wide divergence of views within the Liberal Party and within the Labor Party, as we're seeing it at the moment, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And I hear those differences of view every day. So on the one hand, you've got people who understandably say, Angus, we need to focus on affordable, reliable energy. We need a manufacturing sector in this country which can rely on affordable, reliable energy. Those jobs in that manufacturing sector are crucial for this country. It turns out there's about 900,000, 850,000 of them. And of course, many others that rely on that sector for their livelihoods. And those people who work in that sector are the backbone of so much of what we do here in Australia. But on top of that, we know that affordable, reliable energy is, really crucial for people's budgets, for making ends meet. And of course, the poorer you are, the bigger part of your budget, of your household budget, all small business budget, but household budgets in particular, I'm focused on now. The poorer you are, the bigger part of that is your energy bill. And of course, then at the other extreme, particularly as we get towards the CBDs of our capital cities in Sydney and Melbourne, you hear a very different point of view, which says, look, Angus, it's not affordable, reliable energy we should be focused on, it's bringing down emissions. And we must focus on that above all else, and let's not worry too much about the rest of it. That's a crucial issue for us. Now, typically, those different points of view, and it's just sort of a shades of grey in between, but those different points of view are represented by people picking their favourite fuel source. And so when I get pulled up in the street and people say, Angus, how are you? I just wanted to tell you that we've just got to build another couple of coal-fired power stations and the price will come down and everything will be right. Someone else will pull me up and say, Angus, we've got to build a nuclear power station in this country. Another one will pull me up and say, Angus, forget this coal and nuclear stuff. We need more solar and wind. We've just got to get more solar and wind and get our emissions down. And then others will say, actually, Angus, the gas industry is growing fast in Australia. We've got to make sure we've got enough domestic gas for Australian manufacturers and Australian energy users. And so I get all of that. I get all of that in my hometown of Goulburn. I get all of that if I'm in the CBD of Sydney. I get all of that, wherever I go to differing degrees. It tends to be more at one end of the spectrum when you're in the outer suburbs and regions and more at the other end of the spectrum when you're in the CBD. But to reconcile this and to deal with it, the approach we've taken is very, very simple. And it's to say, let's focus on the outcomes. Let's focus on getting the price of energy to a reasonable level, which is important for our industry, for our manufacturers, for small business, for households. Let's make sure we keep the lights on. And we've seen some terrible instances in South Australia and Victoria in particular in recent years of not keeping the lights on. But at the same time, let's bring down emissions in a way which is not going to impose costs on the economy, which is not going to be a carbon tax, which is not going to be an economic burden for Australians, for Australian industry, for Australian households and businesses. And focusing relentlessly on those outcomes is the approach we've taken, rather than getting caught up in what's the favourite fuel source. Now, the truth is, to get to those outcomes, when you look at it market by market, state by state, right across Australia, ultimately you need a balance. No energy system ever works without some degree of balance. And that's very much what we've focused on the fuel source side. And I'll say a little bit about some of those different fuel sources and technologies that are emerging at the moment. But what we're finding more and more is maintaining that balance in the system is the absolutely crucial issue to get the outcomes. And let me spend a moment on the outcomes, because the story is a good one. And I really want to emphasise this, because the newspapers won't always publish all of this, but these facts are enormously important. We are seeing in the last 12 months, before COVID struck indeed, a very significant reduction, a structural reduction in the price of energy in this country. We've seen a halving of the gas price from about $10 a gigajoule, the wholesale gas price, from about $10 a gigajoule down to about $5. That's now fallen through COVID to closer to $4. We've seen a halving of wholesale electricity prices from about $100 a megawatt hour down to below 50. And again, most of that had happened before COVID struck. And they are related changes. Indeed, the price of gas is actually now enormously important in the price of electricity. So having more gas coming into the system, having more gas available for our electricity generators, which we've been working on for some time, is now really biting and making a difference. But on top of that, the crucial thing we're now seeing in both of these markets, in electricity and gas, is more supply coming in without interruptions from big losses of supply. And this is a crucially important point. What we saw in South Australia and Victoria in recent years was big losses of coal-fired generators without replacement, without a plan. They just went. So Hazelwood in Victoria was the biggest of them a few years back about 3 or 4 years ago. And a massive coal generator left the marketplace, nothing to replace it. The wholesale price essentially doubled. Right? Now, we're not seeing that, and we've been working very hard to make sure that doesn't happen. If a coal generator has to go, because we do have ageing coal generators, they come to their end of their lives, there has to be replacement, and it has to be like-for-like replacement. Right? And that has been our very, very strong focus. On the gas side, just getting more supply into the market, and we're seeing that with the proviso that the exporters leave enough domestic gas for domestic gas use, for electricity, for home gas use, for industry gas use as well. And so those things are really starting to make a difference. In fact, more than starting to make a difference. Our challenge now is to make sure that those big reductions we're seeing in wholesale electricity and gas prices are passed through to customers. We're seeing that. We've had a record number of consecutive quarters of CPI price reductions in electricity. They're accumulating over time. We're seeing the same in gas. We've seen a record number of reductions in the wholesale prices I mentioned on top of that. But the retail prices are now starting to bite. And what it means in practical terms is if you shop around now, there's more good deals available than you've seen for a long, long time. You can actually get great discounts. We've set up a website called Energy Made Easy, where you can actually put your bill into the website, upload it, and it will come back to you with the best possible plan given your usage, and it'll go and seek out the plan that's going to give you the best possible deal. And that's taking advantage of these wholesale price reductions that we're seeing in the marketplace. There's a number of other things we've done to facilitate those reductions in prices. We've made a whole series of announcements just in the last little while on the budget about gas and making sure we get those wholesale price reductions in gas pass through to customers and to industry. And we're working closely with industry, with manufacturers and others to ensure that happens. On the emission side, there'll be some in the audience that say we shouldn't focus on this. There'll be others, no doubt, who say we should. But the approach we take is let's focus on it without imposing costs on the economy. Let's use technology to do this. And, you know, the traditional view that has been taken on this is the way you get emissions down is you tax people. You impose, you penalise activity. You penalise emissions. Well, you know what? The point I make about this is that if you want new technologies to come into a market, and they always will, new energy technologies has been emerging for a long, long time across the world, for hundreds of years, for thousands of years indeed. If you want new technologies to come into the market, it's not a matter of taxing the old technologies. It's a matter of actually investing in innovation, in R&D, supporting entrepreneurs. You know, the car, the internal combustion engine didn't replace the horse because we taxed the horse. It replaced the horse because it was a better technology and it allowed people to move around more cheaply, faster, more easily. And that's ultimately what drove it. So it's that enterprising, entrepreneurial culture that we want to support in energy, just as we do in every other sector of our economy. And of course, that was a big part of what we talked about in the budget. So that's technology, not taxes. And we're seeing enormous opportunities on the technology side in areas like hydrogen. We have a big hydrogen industry in this country now. If you're eating dinner now or you're going to be eating your dinner later, much of that dinner has come about because of nitrogen fertiliser, which was made from hydrogen. We have a big industry. Now, there's potential for that to be a much bigger industry. The Japanese in particular, Koreans, others throughout Southeast Asia, it's an enormous opportunity for Australia to expand an industry we've been in for many, many years. Soil carbon from the farming side, we've only just touched the sides on what's possible there. And, you know, the great thing about this is anyone who's been farming for a long while, testing their soil for a long while, will know that there's a very high correlation between production from your pastures, particularly if you're a livestock producer, and carbon in your soil. So if we can get the production up, we can get the soil carbon up, great. It's and there are emerging technologies that are hugely helpful now in allowing us to do that. And so there's a range of other technologies that we're focusing on and investing in, but in the way we invest in all R&D in this country, which is we invest through the universities, through the CSIRO and other research bodies. Now, on the emissions side, the truth is that we got rid of the carbon tax. And we have come in with emissions in 2020, which are 20% lower, just under 20% lower than when Labor left government back in 2012, or their forecast of what they would be back in 2012. So back in 2012, they forecast that emissions this year would be 630 million tonnes. They're 530 million tonnes, and we got rid of the carbon tax. They were going to have a carbon tax. They were going to get 100 million tonnes higher, and they were going to meet their goals by going and buying international credits from Kazakhstan, as we like to describe it. We haven't had to do any of that. We've just relied on Australians getting on with the job. Energy efficiency, there's been enormous progress in that, and a range of other technologies that have been the things that have really made the difference on the ground. And that helps critically in helping people to reduce their energy bills, of course, which is central to what we're trying to achieve. So by focusing on outcomes, by focusing on enterprise, by focusing on technology, and by focusing on making sure we deliver what small businesses, households, and industry needs, we can get the best of all worlds. Now, the alternative approach is the one that Labor's been taking for the last few elections, which is to come in with huge targets, no plan to get there other than to impose some version of a carbon tax. And of course, the Australian people have rejected that 3 times in a row. 2 elections in particular, it was clearly rejected in 2013 and in the last election, 2019. And in 2019, we surfaced Labor's real plan with their very aggressive targets and what was clearly going to have to be some version of a carbon tax. But not surprisingly, within the Labor Party, there's a view emerging, particularly from the more conservative unions and those with a focus on manufacturing, that they can't do this again. They can't go to an election imposing a massive cost on energy for all Australians, and particularly those Australians and Australian businesses that are energy intensive. It's not surprising that they're coming to that conclusion, I guess. What's surprising is it's taken them so long. Whether there'll be any resolution of this within the Labor Party remains to be seen. And we've got Mark Butler on the one side, who's clearly an ideological zealot and believes that you have to do whatever you have to do to bring down emissions. And if you have to sacrifice people's jobs, then so be it. And on the other hand, you've got Joel Fitzgibbon and others aligned with him who have realised that Labor can't keep going to elections with these sorts of policies. Well, we're united, we're clear, we're focused on the outcomes. We want to see the right outcomes for all Australians. Labor's divided. That's where we sit at the moment. And that says to me that we're going in the right direction on this and we'll continue to go in exactly the same direction. So that's good progress. There's a lot more to do. There's a huge amount more to do. And I can go into some of the detailed policies that we're driving across, whether it's in the gas sector or the electricity sector or elsewhere. But the one thing I would really emphasise here above all is it's about getting that affordable, reliable energy as we use technology to bring down emissions, not taxes. So I'll stop there, Walter, and very happy to, delighted to take questions on those issues or others. If there's broader issues around what's happening in government at the moment, I'm more than happy to at least attempt to answer, or if I have to, I'll defer to what my ministerial colleagues are saying on those particular topics.
Enormous confidence for you to have such a clear vision that I think is getting an enormous amount of tractions resonating with Australian people, and particularly your ability to simplify the complex so people understand what's at stake and what is a viable transition plan that takes people with them, that protects jobs in the economy, which is key to underpinning what's happening in energy. I'd like to just take this opportunity to welcome Alistair Henschkens, who's Cabinet Secretary, New South Wales Government. Welcome, Alistair. And I'm trying to unmute you there, but we're having a bit of a technical thing, but he's definitely there, trust me on that. I'd just also like to acknowledge my co-host, Fritz Murray, who will be providing the vote of thanks. An apology from our other usual co-host, Natasha McLaren-Jones. Natasha's a leader in the upper house of the government, and they're working through, obviously, this very complex energy bill with about 256 amendments. They worked right through the night yesterday, and they're still at it. So good on Natasha for taking that challenge on. So at this stage, we'll go to questions. And I'll just a little bit of housekeeping. So I'll just remind people, if you go to your chat screen or participants, you'll see down the bottom that there's an opportunity to click on the little hand symbol, and that will allow you then to be identified as someone that wants to ask a question. I might just start with a question that's come in via the chat room. This is from Wes Taylor in North Balgowlah, and he refers to the Santos Narrabri project, and that it's not proposed to go ahead until 2023, and only if the gas price is right, and that is would not proceed unless it's at least $4 per kilojoule. So he's asking, what is the plan B if the criteria isn't met for Santos to proceed?
Yeah, no, so it's a great question, Walter, and thank you for that question. And look, the key with gas, as with any other commodity, if you want affordability, is to have more supply and have more supply from a range of different sources. So there's a number of different sources of supply that are growing right now on the East Coast. We've seen enormous growth in the Surat Basin in Queensland, and of course that can come down to New South Wales at some cost because of the pipeline capacity you've got to make use of to bring it south, although we've seen a significant reduction in the cost of those pipelines based on some reforms that we've made, particularly for getting gas down for electricity generation. But That's one source. There's another group, Twiggy Forest, is working on it on an import terminal at Port Kembla. There's obviously the Santos operation, and the moratorium's been raised on conventional gas in Victoria, which was a traditional source of gas for New South Wales coming up from Victoria. So all of those are potential sources of supply, all different timeframes, all different cost structures. That's how you get more supply into the market, have a portfolio of supply options that are coming in. As I say, the good news is we've seen just a monumental change in gas markets in the last couple of years, which has largely been missed, in fact, and it essentially stems from the United States entering into the global market as an exporter. And this ultimately means that Australian gas producers have got to be internationally competitive in selling their gas in Australia. That's a big change. It's put downward pressure on the price, and it does mean that the projects coming on have to be cost competitive. And Santos knows that. I know they're doing an enormous amount of work to make sure Narrabri is cost competitive. I think it can be. There's lots of good reasons to believe that it will be. I'm optimistic about that project. But, the point is you can't put all your eggs in the one basket. We're pushing every state government to get more gas out from under our feet. New South Wales government, we asked for 70 petajoules. It's looking like the Santos project will be the way to get to that, but it's not the only option. We're working with the Victorians. We said we weren't prepared to work with them on a broader energy deal unless they raise their moratorium, which they're doing. So that's fantastic news. Northern Territory, incredible gas basin up there in the Beetaloo and Macarthur basins. Potentially one of the most attractive gas basins in the world. Looks to be very low cost. It's very similar geology to the Marcellus Shale in the United States, which happens to be in Pennsylvania, which is where Biden's comes from, and it's why Biden actually is pro-gas, despite what some of the people around him think about it. Enormous potential in the Northern Territory. So there's a whole range of options there, Walter, and we're going to continue to pursue those. Gas has this great advantage of being able to firm up the solar on your roof, and we've seen record levels of rooftop solar going in, and I'm sure there's people on this call with rooftop solar. It can firm that up, so when the sun goes down, the gas goes on. It's very, very good. It's very flexible. It provides feedstock for manufacturing processes like production of fertilizer, as I mentioned, ammonia fertilizer, as I mentioned earlier, and it's obviously a source of heat for industry. So, it's a very, very flexible fuel source. We want to see more of it. It's transformed manufacturing in the United States, particularly in the southeast of the United States, but increasingly now in the Midwest because of the Marcellus Shale. And we think we can achieve the same sorts of outcomes here.
Very good. Thank you. I'll now go to Mark White. Mark's the president of the Artarmon branch. Welcome, Mark. You need to take your microphone off mute, mate. Go ahead, Mark. No, Mark might have a bit of a technical challenge there. Mark, you just need to have a look at your microphone. In the meantime, we'll go to someone from the younger generation, which is terrific. They're engaged on it. So I'll now go to Lachlan McIntyre.
Thanks very much, Walter. Lachlan from Roseville Branch. Minister, according to the International Energy Agency, 60% of all solar panels are made in China, a figure that is growing rapidly and quickly. Meanwhile, the US under President Trump has become fully energy independent, and it and its allies produce more than 40% of the world's crude oil. Is the so-called transition to renewables as much about geopolitical influence and power as emissions reduction?
Good to hear from you, Lachlan, and great question. Well, I guess the answer is it depends who you're talking about. There's no question that there's some who would like to use this issue for geopolitical influence. There's no doubt about that. That's been there's been individuals who've sought to do that in the past, and I'm sure will in the future. But look, I think there's also a group, as I said at the beginning, who genuinely think that it is important for good reasons that we deploy technologies and bring down emissions. And at the same time, if we're doing it right, we bring down costs, which has always been a very strong focus for me. The whole question, though, of energy independence and making sure that we're in control of our own destiny is an important issue. I mean, there's no question about that. Whether you're the United States or Australia or any other country in the world, it's been a big issue in Europe. I was referring to other countries that use energy to seek influence, and there's no doubt that Russia's supply of gas into Europe has been used for political purposes. That's a statement of fact. Historically, that is the nature of it. I think the important thing from an Australian point of view is that we have always been an energy superpower. I mean, we started our coal industry with Japan as a customer and used that. Then that coal, of course, was being used domestically as well. Our gas industry, again, in a very similar way, export born. We really were fundamental in creating the LNG industry. We're in a fantastically strong position as a big energy exporter to have that degree of energy independence. It's been a bigger challenge for us with oil in recent years, and we're working closely on that. And having the Beetaloo Basin come forward with liquids which can produce oil would be a real positive on that. So it's something we need to stay focused on. And a degree of energy independence is a great advantage. There's no question about that. In a world where geopolitically, there's no question as well that it's become more challenging. So it's something we focus on, and it's part of the reason why we think having a strong domestic gas industry in Australia is so important.
Okay, we might just try Mark White again. Mark, how are you going there? Not having any luck there. We'll go to Dr. Carolyn Curry.
Hi, Angus. I'm a great admirer of your stance, your firm stance. We were debating Zali's bill at Women's Council this morning, and also the 34 objections that Mr. Latham has put up to Matt Keane's climate change bill. I was late because I'm currently writing a submission to the Climate Action Committee, and just briefly reading through Zali's 53 pages, I would like to know your opinion on why on earth do we need a climate change commission? Isn't this extra parliamentary? Isn't this taking power away from the elected people? I'm sorry, the whole thing makes me very angry because we've lost one of the best political operatives in the Liberal Party to a woman in this area where I live, Warringah, who is doing nothing other than agitate for a far more expensive form of energy. And I just paid $2,600 in 1 quarter for 2 houses' electricity bill. So I'm not feeling very chuffed about renewables.
No, I understand, Carolyn, and you should jump on that Energy Made Easy website, by the way. It is a fantastic way. I mean, I followed this closely and I found some pretty significant savings on my bill. So there's something that's worth having a look at anyway. But look, your point about Zali's bill, look, I agree. I mean, you know, it's a recipe for a whole lot more bureaucracy and administration. And if your objective is to bring down emissions, I don't know how bureaucracy and administration helps. It's not the way forward. The way forward is on smart entrepreneurs, enterprising entrepreneurs who develop new technologies, just like we've developed energy technologies for hundreds or thousands of years. That's how we're going to address this issue. And it's that entrepreneurship and enterprise that we've got to, that's what we've always got to tap. I mean, it's what we believe in as Liberals. And I'm sure the people of Warringah, if you put it to them and said, well, do you think the answer to this is bureaucracy or enterprise and entrepreneurship? I can bet which way they're going to go on this. So that's we've got to make that very clear to them in the coming year, 18 months, that's the choice they're essentially that's being made for them by their elected representative. We don't think her bill is the right way to go. We do think it's outsourcing the role of government and politicians to bureaucrats. And, you know, that's not something that we believe in as a party, and certainly we don't believe in it as a government.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll now go to Malcolm Bush. Welcome, Malcolm. Okay, technically challenged. Bear with me. Okay, while we're sorting that out, I'll just go to the.
Hello.
Oh, good, Malcolm. Welcome.
Thank you, Minister. My question is something that you're involved in prior to taking on the Ministry of the one you're in now, and that was you worked in agriculture when you were with McKinsey's, and looking at your CV. One of the things I've been looking at for many years and reading as a long-term member of the Liberal Party and trying to get my message across is when we've got the country. We know the country suffers with droughts and then flooding rains, the whole bit, but we've never really gone any further in bringing water from the northern part of Australia down to the south and damming it in various places, which would create not only an amazing source for the future, but also it could be used for energy as we develop down the line. Is there any way that the pipes that carry the gas can also carry water without tarnishing the water? I'm not a scientist. That's just a question. If it is, please let me know through Walter or Fritz which way we can go to get this message across, because I think we need to be looking at it in the bigger picture. I know it's not right on your agenda, but it's something in the future, and being previously in agriculture, you'd understand the importance of it.
Well, Malcolm, thank you for your question. Actually, I'm still in agriculture. I live on a farm, and whilst my brother runs the family farming operation, I run my own. The place where I live, and it's actually something I enjoy keeping my hand in, because I love farming, I love agriculture, I love what it's all about, and I think, like most of us on our side of politics, we care deeply about that sector. And you're right, water is absolutely essential to it. The good news is we're having an incredible season this year. It's just beautiful. So there's no better season than a season with good rain after a drought. But look, your point about damming and moving water around is absolutely right. Look, I'm not aware of being able to transport water with gas. I think that's probably tricky, but I've never looked at it. The great challenge with water is transporting it over large distances. And in fact, human beings resolved this problem a long while ago. Because if you look at the trade of agricultural products across the world, it's actually a trade in water. Now that sounds bizarre, but if you look at it, the countries that export a lot of agricultural goods are the countries that have an excess of water. So you look at New Zealand, per capita, they've got a huge amount of water. You look at Australia, actually, even though we're a very dry continent, per capita, per person, we actually have a lot more water than the countries agricultural water than the countries, when you include rainfall, the countries we export to. It's so in a sense, when you sell soybeans or wheat, you're actually you're making up for the lack of water that's available at the other end, at the customer end. So that's one of the ways we do it. But there's no question that storing more water and managing more water locally can make a huge difference. And we've got projects happening now in a number of places, including at both ends of my electorate. One end of the electorate focused on agriculture, the other end focused on municipal water, Warragamba Dam at one end, but which is being done by the state government, but Wyangala Dam at the other end, which is focused on agriculture. And we're essentially raising the wall at Wyangala. By raising an existing wall, it's a much cheaper way of getting more water into the system, and that will supply down through the Lachlan to irrigators down in that area and beyond. And it's fantastic to have water projects going again. May there be many more of them, because I think these are enormously important projects for the nation.
Okay, thank you, Angus. We will try and go to Mark White again. Mark, how are you sounding now?
Good. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear. Go ahead.
Good. Excellent. Thank you. Yes. Good evening, Minister Angus. The issue I'd like to bring up is about marketing. we have an enormous complex message to sell here on energy. And it reminds me of when Tony Abbott was Prime Minister and he had to explain on the tax and other issues, and he kept it to a very short narrative about, you would recall very clearly, going around the country, stop the boats and stop the tax. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute it can be as simple as that. However, coming from I'm one of the few people in the Liberal Party these days that owns an actual real business and is involved in marketing all my life. So every word I say, I actually put my own money on the table for it, Angus, a little bit like your farm. So I'm sure you understand too. But with marketing, you need to keep it simple. The KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. I saw you on, I think it was Credlin last night, or one of those shows, Kenny or Credlin, and explaining it. And you're very articulate, Angus, and I'm not pissing in your pocket. You're very good at doing it compared to a lot of your other colleagues. However, we need to just focus and do it like a campaign, in my opinion, where you focus on one point, sell that for a week, just selling that point, and then the next week sell that point, and the next week sell that point. Because I know the punters out there are not understanding it. They're not understanding our message. As Walter knows, I own quite a large trades company where I employ a lot of tradesmen who are earning the 150 plus a year, who are our voters, Angus. And those people are not understanding it. They know I'm involved in the Liberal Party and they come and ask me all the time, what's going on? Now, I'm not suggesting we act like Neanderthals and go back to coal, coal, coal. However, we've got to give them a vision, as in nuclear power is it for the future. But what we've got to do is transition towards it in using realistic transitions, like keep coal going, even build another coal-fired plant or two or three, but go into gas like you're prosecuting at the moment, which is fantastic. So my point is the marketing, Angus. We're not.
So let me respond to that. Let me respond to that.
Yeah.
So you jumped from marketing to a fuel source in about a minute, right? And this is what everyone does. So the trouble with that is that might be your favourite fuel source, but it won't necessarily be the favourite fuel source of your neighbour or the person across the road. And this is the challenge, is a lot of people want to hear about their favourite fuel source. That is their, because if you listen to 2GB or Sky, most of the commentators have their favourite fuel source, and we all have our favourite commentators, and we say, you've got to talk more about my favourite fuel source. So it would be easy if everyone in the country said, this is my favourite fuel source, and you just need to talk about that. The marketing would be incredibly simple. So here's where the marketing will go in the next 12 months, and you're going to hear a lot of it. It will be outcome, outcome, outcome. Lower prices, lower emissions, and no taxes. Technology, not taxes. Very simple. Because at the end of the day, middle Australia, those quiet Australians who voted us in last time around, those quiet Australians, they're just interested in the outcomes. They don't want an ideological fight about a fuel source. They want to know that their bill's going to go down and is coming down, and that their job, if they're in an energy-intensive industry, is safe and is not threatened by rising energy costs. And there are many, and it's true that there's a range of views on this call, who also want to see emissions coming down, but they don't want to do it in a way that's going to hurt their business or their hip pocket. And so it's that outcome, outcome, outcome. Emissions coming down, lower fuel prices, lower energy prices, lower gas and electricity prices. And the thing is that the runs are now coming onto the board. We're seeing it. It's happening. And that allows us over the next 12 to 18 months in the lead up to the next election just to focus on those outcomes. So I get that some won't be satisfied by that they'll want to hear about nuclear, or they'll want to hear a vision about coal, or a vision about gas, or a vision about solar. And, you sort of, that aligns across the political spectrum. But the truth is that most of Middle Australia just wants an outcome. And that's exactly where we're focused. And that's the message you will continue to hear, and you will hear it many times over. But, getting the runs on the board is what they ultimately want. And we've we've got ourselves in a position where that is actually happening now.
Okay, I'll now go to the chat room, and a question from John Crawford, Secretary of the Condamine Branch and a stalwart of the Democratic Reform Movement. And full disclosure, a former Navy man, which is relevant to the question. John says, firstly, congratulates you on your courageous stand on democratic reform. And his question is, why are we shy of nuclear energy? Also, the benefits to defence with adequate subs, etc. So a bit of a broad ranging question there.
No, thanks, Walter. And having said all of that, I'm happy to talk about the individual fuel sources because I know we have a very engaged audience that does want to go into that detail. And so happy to do that. Look, on nuclear, we've got a moratorium in this country. We would need bipartisanship almost certainly to get it through the Senate, any change through the Senate. So that's a challenge in its own right. The bigger issue, though, is this. If you want to get the cost of energy down, you've got to get more supply in quickly. And that's exactly what we're doing. There's a range of different fuel sources helping us. We think gas can play a big role. There's hydro potential. Obviously, household solar is happening anyway. People are putting it on their roofs, and that's adding to supply as well. So all of those things are happening. To get a nuclear generator up economically is a huge challenge. And if you look at the experience with nuclear around the world, it has invariably been heavily subsidised by government. And it has invariably been expensive, not because the operating costs are expensive. The uranium cost is relatively modest because the capital costs are so high. Now, there's an emerging technology, small modular reactors, where there's great hope and there are real prospects. Only 3 have been built. Many more are likely to be built in the coming years. We're watching this very closely, and we're interested to see whether the technology delivers on the promise. But that is where the best prospects are for nuclear. A traditional nuclear power station, very expensive prospect. The cost of electricity, if customers are to pay for that, will not be cheap, and that's the challenge. And it's why it's been, you're seeing countries backing away from it for a variety of reasons, but you know, there's a lot of countries in the world now. China's building nuclear generators and they're moving towards the small modular reactors. So that'll be very interesting to watch. But there's a lot of countries that have moved away simply because of the cost.
I have a couple of questions that are effectively supplementary questions to the nuclear issue, and I'm sorry to stay with one fuel source at the moment, but Sean Burke asks, what about, can we have a positive response in relation to nuclear? But more pertinently, this from Councillor Alan Haselden, why can't we at least begin a debate in relation to nuclear industry?
No, it's a good question, Alan, and thank you for that. So we have. I mean, that's why we got Ted O'Brien to chair a committee. He's put out a really good report on it, actually. I think he did a fantastic job. Ted's a member from up on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, great guy. And he has done some really good work. And he essentially came to the conclusion that I just described, which is that traditional nukes, very difficult to get the economics to work. Small modular reactors, looking very prospective, but very early days. We've got to see a lot more before we know whether the economics will actually work. So that's where it's at, but we'll be watching very closely. Can I say, I can just see Alistair Henchkins there. It's really great to see you, Alistair. And I hope you managed to get some sleep. Well, actually, you haven't. It was the upper house that was awake all night, wasn't it? Anyway, it's good to see you there.
Okay, we'll now go to Sasha Grebe.
Minister, congratulations on all your recent announcements, especially the technology roadmap and markets. Technology, not taxes or targets, I'd say, but it's often claimed, Minister, that renewable power from wind and solar is the cheapest energy source that we have. And now, does that pricing account for the free riding by renewables on thermal? And by that, I mean, there is a tipping point at which renewables will have to start providing grid stability without coal or gas, if some people get their way. And if renewable energy has to provide comparable, as you said, grid stability, are these costs being accounted for? Now, are renewable prices inclusive of all the technology and infrastructure that will be needed for them to replace gas for firming and grid inertia? Things like pumped hydro, batteries, hydrogen, new inverters, all those investments, many of which aren't ready. So shouldn't these costs be included in the pricing for renewables, not back on thermal like some have recently suggested? And can we have a stable and all renewable grid without resorting to rationing, otherwise known as demand management?
Thanks, Sasha. Good to see you. And great question. Difficult question. Lots of different components to that. I'll try and sort of stick with a simple version of the answer, which is, well, look, I think the best way to test all of this is to ensure that we avoid wherever we can unnecessary subsidies for individual fuel sources. We've been taking the federal subsidies away through the renewable energy target, which comes to a conclusion this year. The small scale renewable energy scheme, which is scaling down now and will continue to scale down over the next couple of years, and then allow different fuel sources to compete on their technologies, on their raw economics. Just let the market decide. I mean, we don't go to an airline and say, the economics of a big plane is better than the economics of a small plane, so we're going to make you buy big planes. We let the market work it out. That's how we think as Liberals. Now, you make a really good point here, which is, are they really taking into account, when they put in another solar cell or a wind farm, the impact that may be having on the stability of the grid? And that's why we introduced a couple of years back now, the retailer reliability obligation, which essentially puts the obligation on retailers now to ensure that there's stability in the grid. So when they buy power from a wind farm, they have to stabilise that power with balance from a dispatchable fuel source, whether it's gas or hydro or coal or whatever it might be. So that's an obligation we've imposed, and it's a really important reform we've made to make sure that fuel sources are competing on their merits. That reform is in place. It's being tweaked as we go. We'll see more refinement in the next little while. And there's no question, as you get more renewables in the system, it puts enormous strain on the rest of the system if you don't have enough balancing dispatchable power. And that's why I say the answer in energy system will always be balance. It's got to be balanced. You go to any country in the world, there will be a balance of different fuel sources. If you have interventionist policies that get that balance out of whack, you're going to be in big trouble. And that's why we constantly focus on making sure we've got a market in place that's going to get that balance right.
Okay, we have referred to Alistair a few times tonight. In fairness, Alistair, you may like to say a few comments at this stage.
Hi, Angus. How are you? Very interesting talk. Angus, what's your view on obviously the national market? I suppose it's more a competition question. The national electricity market was essentially set up as a market operating mechanism. The more government intervenes, obviously, in the market, the less it retains its original integrity.
Well, it depends on the interventions, but yes, and that's the risk. I agree. And what we're seeing for many years now, it's not new, is state governments making local state interventions, and there's risks with that. There's no question. I mean, I've been very clear about that even this week, that we've got to be very, very careful. The great advantage of having a national market is that when you've got excess supply in one state, it can go to another state that has excess demand. It's as simple as that. And that puts downward pressure on prices, improves reliability. It's a good thing. And the national electricity market has actually been a big success. So we have to be very careful that state governments are not doing things that would result in losing that national electricity market. And that's something we continue to work closely with state governments to make sure we get sensible outcomes on that. But the goal here has to be the very simple goal: affordable, reliable electricity. That's what people want, and that's what we all have to align to deliver.
Okay, thank you, Angus. We now have a question from Jonathan Upfer.
Yes, hello, Minister. Thank you for taking the time out to do this Q&A tonight. My question relates to the fossil fuel situation in Australia with the further closures of refineries likely in the near future. That's going to mean a reliance of over 80 or more % on imported fossil fuels. And I'm from Melbourne, and anyone who remembers what it was like a few months back with deserted streets, that will prefigure what is likely to happen if we were to have maritime disruption. Storage of oil is not going to answer the question because we don't have the refining capacity to actually make the finished product. We won't have pretty soon. And the other option, I think, is gas to liquids, which actually ties to your theme about the expansion of gas. Have you got any views about what that might be?
Yeah, no, thanks, Jonathan. No, look, it's a big deal. I mean, refineries are one part of it, but upstream production is actually, you still got an import issue if you don't have upstream production. So if you don't have oil, crude oil available in Australia, then you've got the same problem that you've described in some form. Now, that's why you're proposing, I understand, gas to liquids as a potential solution to that. Again, it comes down to cost. If it's going to cost more at the Bowser, that's always hard. I do think, and you know, for those of you who haven't been following this debate, it's not a new one, but what's been happening is Bass Strait has been running down. And as Bass Strait runs down, we have less crude oil in Australia. And that means we have to import either crude oil or indeed the finished product, diesel, petroleum and aviation gas. And the risk with that is that if you have, as Jonathan rightly put it, a maritime disruption, if the shipping lanes are closed for one reason or another, whether they be strategic reasons or others, then you risk having a disruption to your oil supply. So it's a big deal. It's an important issue. So what we've done in the last little while is we have put in place a series of reforms to begin addressing this. It is true that one of the important reforms to this is to try and get more upstream production of oil in Australia. One of the places where we can definitely get that is the Beetaloo Basin. That's why we're so excited about the Beetaloo Basin up in the Northern Territory as a potential source of upstream oil. I think there's more to come from Bass Strait. Exxon has said that it's selling out, and new owners who come in with an aging resource like that will tend to get more production out. So we're looking to try and get more of that production. We've also, as part of that reform, we're recognising the fuel security role that refineries play, which you pointed out, and we've increased the amount of fuel that has to be stored, which, as you say, it's one answer. It's not necessarily always going to be the best answer, but it's one way you can try to address this issue. So it's something we continue to work on, and we've announced a series of reforms that we'll keep keeping you informed of in the coming months if you're interested in that issue.
Okay. Question now from Felicity Pullman. Just giving her the mic now. Bear with me. Okay. No. Sorry, Felicity, can you...
Okay, yes, I think I'm loud.
Okay.
Thank you, Minister. We're talking about cheap energy, lower emissions and all the rest of it. So I just want to revisit, please, the nuclear situation again. I recently sat through a Zoom meeting between Jason Felitsky and Michael Schellenberger from the States, who is a very strong advocate of nuclear energy. They are building these modules. There's a couple being built in the UK right now. They're using them through Europe. I think if we don't start thinking about this, if we don't start marketing the idea of going nuclear, we are just going to be left behind the 8 ball. This is the 21st century, and this is a 21st century source of energy. We have the uranium. We have the capacity to do it. We are innovative and creative. We should be able to do this. And just for everyone listening, if you get a chance to look at Michael Schellenberger's work, he writes books, and as I say, he was on Zoom with Jason Felitsky. He puts forward a very cogent argument for going nuclear. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and I've seen Michael's stuff. I think he's done some very good work. I agree with you, Felicity. Look, I guess I just make the same point. You've got to be careful. The UK is building a new nuclear power station. It's been a very, very difficult project for them, an extremely difficult project for them. So it's not an easy industry. The small modular reactors are, there's great hope for them. I certainly have great hope for them, but we've got a long way to go. There's not one that's been built in the developed world yet. 3 in the developing world, but there are plans. There's projects in the plans and in the pipeline, and we're going to be watching those extremely closely for the reasons you say. But the broader point I make here is this: everyone has their favourite technology. Sometimes it's a proven technology. Sometimes it's a technology that still has some way to go. Our best chance of delivering affordable, reliable energy is to have a portfolio, is to have a range of technologies, a range of fuel sources. Each fuel source has advantages and disadvantages, and it's that balance that works. It's always worked in our energy system, works in energy systems all around the world, and I think that's how we're going to get there. Could nuclear be part of that solution sometime into the future? Well, let's watch these small modular reactors and see how they go. We don't have a nuclear industry in this country. We have a uranium industry, and we do some nuclear work at Lucas Heights with some great work there. But we don't have a nuclear generation industry in this country, and it would take quite some time to build one. But the prospects for this technology is something, as I say, we'll keep watching.
Okay, thank you, Angus. We'll now go to Graham Bridges.
Yeah, thanks, Walter. Angus, thanks very much for your speech. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, can hear you well.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, thanks very much. Look, I've got the enormous privilege, apart from being a member of the Mountie Warringah Hellenic branch, and we like to think of ourselves as the heartland of the party over here. But my other major pride is working in the biggest LNG industry in the world. I normally work up in West Australia, but I work in the offshore oil and gas with Woodside, ConocoPhillips, Chevron, you name it. So yeah, it's pretty exciting up there, and it's a world that not many of us get to see. So I'm privileged in that respect as well. Ironically, I'm quite agnostic about energy supplies, and I think that it's politically very sensible and consistent with Liberal Party values for us not to be hung up on any one particular aspect. And I say that with the greatest respect for those putting forward nuclear. But what I'm actually interested in is furthering Liberal Party values by looking at a way to value add each of our energy sources that we're providing to the world, building jobs, taking advantage of a post-COVID environment where I don't think many people have evaluated the strength of the position Australia is in right now, where we've almost eradicated the COVID virus, which is devastating the rest of the world. Now, that's not a great thing, but it certainly works in our advantage that we're able to be in a much stronger position to take advantage of our dominance in the supply of LNG. We've got 40% of the world's uranium. We've got some really good brownfield sites in Bass Strait. I normally work off the Timor coast in the Bayou Undan field, and that's pretty exciting stuff. We've done amazing things as a government to work ourselves into a diplomatically advantageous position with the East Timorese government. We've done some fantastic things. So how do we value add those energy sources that we're providing to the world, deliver not just that end product, just that raw product, but how do we take charge of the finance cycles, the technology cycles, the expertise that we are still trying to come to grips with for the benefit of the Australian economy?
Yeah, no, it's Graham. Thank you very much. And I should have acknowledged that we've built the biggest LNG export sector, liquefied natural gas export sector in the world in a few short years. Essentially, it was developed here in Australia, initially, of course, in the Northwest. and now on the East Coast. And I mean, it's a remarkable story of Australian enterprise and entrepreneurship. And you know, you've been part of that, and it's a brilliant story. But the whole question of value adding our energy and our strength in energy, really good question. We have done that traditionally, you know, with aluminium smelters, alumina refineries, steel mills, you know, ammonia and fertilizer, ammonium nitrate, and so on. There's many different businesses across Australia that are relying on that and continue to be relying on that. Can we strengthen that and build that? It's a great question. Part of it is making sure we've got the affordable, reliable energy sources. I mean, for jobs in manufacturing, 850,000 people work in manufacturing now. This is crucially important, not just for new jobs, but just existing jobs. But we want to see new jobs as well. And there's no time like now. I mean, jobs are everything at the moment, of course, as we come out of the pandemic. So you raise a great issue. Look, to do that, we've got to do a range of things. Yes, we've got to get affordable, reliable energy. We've got to make sure the capital costs of building major projects here in Australia are competitive. That's been a challenge. Industrial relations issues there around greenfield sites, which Christian Porter's looking at the moment. We've got to get our skills right. Michaela Cash is doing a power of work on that at the moment. We've got to make sure we've got a really competitive engineering sector and all of those things. And we've got to make sure that state government approvals and federal government approvals are streamlined, don't impose excessive cost. And we're working on streamlining the EPBC, which is the federal environmental legislation right now, so that there's only one layer you've got to go through, not two layers. And we'd like to see the states really streamlining their legislation. Now, if we can get those things right, and all of those things are a very strong focus for the cabinet, for the government at the moment, I think we can be competitive again in building big projects, in building energy-intensive manufacturing. The competitive advantage of low labour cost countries, I think, has diminished in recent years. The technologies have improved so much. I think there's real potential to do that. The gas industry where you are, obviously it's a crucial feedstock for many of those industries. So this is something that I'm passionate about. I know the Prime Minister is as well, really re-establishing our preeminence in manufacturing. It is absolutely a priority for the government, but we've got to make sure we get all of those things aligned, and then I think we position ourselves well to re-strengthen our manufacturing sector.
Okay, thank you, Angus. We'll now go to Rob Gilton. Thank you, Rob.
Good evening, Minister. You can hear me okay?
I can.
Sure, thank you. Firstly, I'll just say I'm a big fan and appreciate everything that you're doing. I just wanted to bring up an issue and get your thoughts on electric vehicles in particular. There's probably two parts to the question. The first is around fleets and what we can do to incentivise fleets to transition, because obviously there's a big opportunity to lower emissions in the transport sector by doing that, not just government fleet, private fleet as well. And the second point, probably more important, is a couple of the states recently have flagged that they might look for an own revenue source by potentially putting an additional or new tax on electric vehicles. And given that excise is not really predicted to have any kind of meaningful decline until around 2030, 2040 perhaps, what's your view, given the fact that the vehicles at the moment are so expensive and they obviously pay huge amounts in GST and LCT and state rego and tolls and stamp duty and all those types of things? What's your view on placing kind of an additional burden on the purchase of those vehicles at this point in time while they're really kind of still in their embryonic stage and really need incentivising, which is what a lot of the portfolios are doing, and including your portfolio, I might add. But it just seemed a little bit counterproductive for me to states to be starting to talk about a new tax on this technology at this point.
Yep, two great questions there. Let me take them one at a time. So the first question of fleets, and let me make some broad comments on electric vehicles. There was a debate about electric vehicles at the last election, and I've got to say our position is really clear. It's that this is a matter for customer choice, not for government telling people what kind of car to drive. But as electric vehicles continue to improve, and they will, and the economics keeps getting better, and the products keep getting better, I have no doubt that there will be strong uptake in Australia, and we want to facilitate customer choice rather than to impose the government's view. This is the difference between the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. The Labor Party will tell you what kind of car to drive. We'll give you the choice and make sure that you can make that choice. And that means we've got to support it with appropriate infrastructure, for instance. Now, your first question about fleets, it is likely that the biggest early uptake of a large number of vehicles will be through fleets. I agree with that 100%, absolutely. And particularly private fleets, not just government fleets, but private fleets, as you rightly point out. And the reason for that is an electric vehicle, the economics work best for an electric vehicle when it's highly utilised because the maintenance costs are very low. So that works fantastically well for fleets. And so our facilitation and much of the work we're doing in this area, and we had $50 million for future fuels package in the budget, is just about making sure the infrastructure is there to support the uptake of those EVs, particularly the fleets. And it's that role of facilitating and providing infrastructure, which is a traditional government role. That's the role that we're absolutely playing. The whole question of the fuel excise, look, it's an important one. It's a tricky one because, your view about how fast the fuel excise goes depends on your view of the uptake of electric vehicles. And many electric vehicle advocates say there'll be very fast uptake, but they're also the ones that say there shouldn't be any equivalent to the fuel excise. Look, these are things that have been done by state governments, not the federal government. We haven't taken a policy position on it. They can impose those charges, which are below. In fact, I note that I think it's Victoria's 2.5 cents a kilometre, which is below what would be the equivalent with the fuel excise, I should say. I think it's about 50% of it. So they are coming in at a subsidised level. But that's been a matter for the states, and no doubt there'll be more discussion about this over the coming time. But our focus has been very much just making sure we get the supporting infrastructure in place, the charging infrastructure, the electricity infrastructure, and that so people can make that choice as the economics becomes attractive to fleet owners and to individuals.
I'll ask a question, a guest that's from outside of Warringah, and I'll just say that after this question, we'll ask two more live questions. Alistair Henskins would like to just ask another question, Jeff Hudson, and then we'll wrap up. So this question's from Jim Simpson, the 5 Dock branch. The question is, hi Angus, pleased to hear of the free market concept with obligations placed upon the retailers to ensure their use of the unreliables, primarily wind and solar, must be met by firming support from baseload energy, most likely coal and or gas. My question relates to this area. What penalties, presumably financial, apply in the event that retailers fail to secure sufficient firming baseload capacity, resulting in major power failures due to a lack of either sufficient and or reliable stable power from the unreliables? Jimson.
Yeah, so again, another great question. So the retailer reliability obligation has penalties embedded in it for non-compliance, and they're essentially they're supposed to be over time in line with the cost to customers of not being able to deliver on that supply of electricity. So they're very real, and I know where the retailer reliability obligation is biting, the retailers are taking it seriously. We are constantly tweaking that retailer reliability obligation to make sure it's absolutely right, and getting those penalties right over the next couple of years is going to be very, very important, because as you rightly say, what it essentially does is it says to the retailer, AGL or Energy Australia or Origin, you've got to be able to deliver to your customers. That's your job. You've got to be able to deliver reliable electricity to your customers. And that means if you're going to have a lot of solar and wind, you've got to have matching supply that can be there when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. It's as simple as that. And you're right, that only works if there are penalties, and there are, and they're designed to be set at a level which recognises the economics of what's required. So that's how it's designed. It's enormously important, and it does put back onto the retailers this job of making sure they've got the balance in their system to deliver to customers.
Okay, over to you, Alistair.
Angus, at the beginning of the pandemic, it became quite obvious that there were a number of essential items which, personal protective equipment, ventilators and the like, which weren't readily manufactured and available in Australia. I'm a great believer in free markets, but there are some essential things which perhaps if the free market can't deliver in Australia, that maybe we need to look at government supporting. Oil refinery might be one thing in your portfolio as an example, but there are other things. And also maybe electricity infrastructure componentry as well, that if we're reliant upon foreign producers will not be readily available. Has the federal government given any thought to that, and whether we should have a list of kind of essential manufactured goods that we should look at subsidising locally?
Yeah, great question, Alistair. So there's two parts to that. One is what we might loosely call cyber risks, and items where there are cyber risks, i.e. things that we buy where there could be a cyber security risk. So particularly in telecommunications, some energy equipment, as you rightly point out. And then the second is where we just have to have a security of supply. So that's the vaccine is a really good example of that, where if a vaccine comes good, and we're increasingly optimistic on this, that you actually have the supply you want. But the same could be said for PPE. There's lots around sanitizer early on in the process, and so on. So other pharmaceuticals. And oil is another one of those that you might say, security supply is a national security issue. So the cybersecurity side of it is managed by, in Peter Dutton's area, Home Affairs, and through the Foreign Investment Review Board, and that's a very, very strong focus. And of course, we've made decisions on 5G and telecommunications in recent times. I was the cybersecurity minister when we made that decision. It was a very, very important decision, and said, look, we have to have equipment coming into our telecommunications network that we can trust and rely on. And that was a crucial, it was a milestone globally, actually. And we, as a result of that, you've seen the Americans take a strong position, and increasingly you've seen the UK and other countries following our lead. We really led the world on that issue. On the security of supply for products like oil and PPE and so on, yes, this has been an increasing focus. I mean, we announced our fuel security package, and there was that great question earlier, in the budget, and we've been working on that for a while, but the pandemic has really highlighted the concerns in these areas. Karen Andrews in the industry portfolio has been doing a huge amount of work focusing on which industries do we have to really watch out for and have a security of supply, working with Greg Hunt, particularly in health. And with the vaccines, we've taken very strong positions. We've actually essentially been creating our own supply chains for potential vaccines. So that's been important work for the government, and will remain, and it's a big part of discussion at the most senior level of the government, making sure we're getting these things right. So great question.
I have a question, Angus. Fuel reserves. We've had a US-centric approach to our fuel reserves. What is the plan to become more self-reliant and resilient in relation to refinement and storage in Australia?
Yeah, I wouldn't say, Walter, that we've been US-centric on this. I mean, we get our fuel from over 40 different countries from around the world where we import it, and we also produce a significant amount of our own, a diminishing proportion because of Bass Strait. But as I said earlier, we've announced a package in the budget. It has 4 different components. We've established our first ever strategic fuel reserve. We bought fuel at very low prices. You remember they went negative, and we announced the intent to start building our own fuel reserves at that time because of the low prices. It's a good deal for taxpayers. We've increased the stock holding obligations, so there's now a requirement for importers, not for local refiners, but importers to hold a minimum level of stock, and that's increased the amount of diesel they've got to hold by about 40%. As I said, we're recognising now the role that our refineries play, and they're being paid for that. which hasn't been the case in the past. And we've put $200 million, which will be matched by an equivalent amount to build a significant amount of new storage in Australia, fuel storage facilities in Australia. So all of those, as well as opening up the Beetaloo Basin, which gives us access to local fuel. So all of those things, Walter, are really crucial to making sure we have control over our own destiny, which is, of course, you know, a pandemic. There's no time like a pandemic to understand what really matters to you and what is absolutely crucial. There's a particular focus in all of that on diesel. And the thing we saw in the pandemic was aviation gas collapsed to zero, petrol use fell by 30 or 40%, but diesel use stayed very, very close to stable. And it tells you something about what really matters when the chips are down and you're locked away. You need the diesel. And so that's why there's such a strong focus in this strategy on diesel.
Very good. We'll go now. Last question to Jeff Hudson. Jeff is the president of the Seaforth branch, and I think he's been a member of the Liberal Party over 40 years. So welcome, Jeff.
80 years, Walter. Thanks, Angus. You mentioned there are 3 modular power stations, nuclear power stations. I don't think we should forget there are 160 ships floating around the world that are powered by about 200 modular nuclear power stations. So, you know, it's just a matter of different applications. There's plenty of them. But my question was about the Santos Narrabri CSG field that's just been approved. I understand about 800 coal seam gas wells are going to be put into the ground, which has upset a lot of farmers because it is contested land. I'm very much in favour of mining, but there's no doubt that the CSG industry will change the floodplain shape of the ground. They'll put in levee banks along roads, pipes will be laid, fences, all that sort of thing. It will have a dramatic effect on the ground, as well as all the saline sludge that comes out of each hole every year. It's thousands and thousands of litres, and it's got to go somewhere. Now, it might be catered for under the 130 guidelines, but if we go up to the Northern Territory, there are 220 trillion cubic feet of gas up there in fairly much uncontested land, and we've got the Timor Gap. And so I just wonder why we don't go to those places to get our gas and oil from, and we go and upset a whole batch of farmers who I think get a pretty raw deal anyway. And you're a farmer, I'm sure you've got a soft spot for them. I'm just wondering why we can't go to uncontested land.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you for your question. Look, there's a lot of that land I can tell you is not contested. There are some contesting it, and I get that, and that's, you know, that's a very reasonable concern, and that I mean, Santos has spent a lot of time working through those issues, and they should. I mean, they need to. They're important, absolutely important issues. I got to say, my experience with gas has been good. I've got gas in my electorate as I've got coal in my electorate up around Camden when I became the local member, and you know, AGL was a good local citizen and got on very well with the local community there with those gas wells on the edge of Sydney, essentially, and that's been a very positive experience. And it's important that Santos work with those farmers and build those relationships. You know, that's how it started off in the Surat Basin, I'd say, too, in Queensland. The relationships up there, and I've been up there to see a lot of this, are extremely good. It's taken a lot of work, and we'll keep encouraging Santos to make sure they bring people along. But my answer on gas is, you know, we want to find every possible opportunity. It's not a matter of one or the other. If there are real opportunities and they are proven through the approval processes to be safe and appropriate, then we should do our best to leverage those. And I have every confidence that the relationships with the local farmers in that area will strengthen over time. But it's important Santos do everything it can to make sure that's the case. The conditions are very strong. I mean, the water conditions in particular are very, very strong. They've had to do a great deal of baselining work to make sure they know exactly where how that water system works, and there are very strong conditions on them if those water levels are not held. So I'm confident that over time they will get those relationships right, but they do need to focus on it.
Angus, that was brilliant. And you're doing an extraordinary job. And as I said earlier, in a complex area, but it is heartening to see somebody that's had the extraordinary career that you've had in the private sector prior to politics, being able to bring all of that experience to bear on such an important thing that will straight to the heart of Australia's future. So at this time, I'd like to now just go to Fritz Murray that will provide the vote of thanks. Thank you, Fritz.
Thank you, Walter. Federal Minister Taylor, members, guests, and ladies, and I hope you saw I said Federal Minister and not just Minister. It's my privilege tonight to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks. And thank you, Angus, for being with us this evening. It's an absolute honour to have you here, and that you took the time out from your busy schedule and that you chose to be with us for this webinar and address our guests and members. I guess we've come to the end of the webinar, and prior to winding up, I'd just like to remind the members that this concludes the Northern Speakers Bureau program for the 2020 year, and we'll resume again the speaker series in March 2021. We hope that you've all had a very good evening, and on behalf of the organising committee and our guests and members, we thank Angus again for all the valuable insights which he has shared with us this evening. Before closing off, I must also mention our deep sense of appreciation to Sean Burke for his continued work and efforts in putting together the technical side of these webinars. Thank you all again this evening for making this event so successful with your contributions, and we hope to see you all again in 2021. And on that note, I say good night to all of you.
Thanks, Fritz.
Thanks, Angus.
Thanks, Angus. Thank you.